Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our final session of 3 sessions introducing tips and tricks for Excel and Power BI and Power Query. On behalf of myself, Marion Prendergast, Chair of the North West District Society, and my committee members, I thank you for your participation in these last 3 events, and I hope that they have been informative and useful to you in your work role in supporting that we're using tools to work smarter. Again, as per the last 2 sessions, for any queries, if you can put them into the chat, Niamh will answer them as we go through the session. And if there's anything complex, Niamh will revert back to you. Just to say, as with previous weeks, we will also be sending out supporting documentation to help you in terms of when you go it alone, in terms of exploring how to use what has been presented in these sessions. Again, just to state that these are just I suppose welcoming sessions or informative sessions. There's more detailed sessions available through the Institute's websites for more detailed learning, should you want to avail of those. Again, just to say, I think everyone can concur with our previous sessions that Niamh is an excellent deliverer in terms of the simplicity at which these complex presentations have been delivered. So to acknowledge Niamh and to say thank you for that. So again, the session will just take just under an hour, and after that then we'll just I'll be acknowledging just to say thank you. Just at this point in time, Arlene has asked me just to present an issue. If anybody was booking the President's Dinner for the 22nd of February, there was an issue with the booking system, and that needs to be looked at again. So if you were bombed out of that booking platform, that should be resolved by close of business today. So you can go back in and book for that President's Dinner on the 22nd of February, and also for our showcase event with Sinead Donovan that's been hosted in the ATU in terms of profiling with other Institute members and the journey through the accountancy profession and the changes that is coming about. So Niamh, over to you, and thank you for your session today.
Thanks, Marion, and good afternoon, everybody, and you're welcome to your final lunch and learn with me. So I hope you found the sessions useful. And then on today's one, we're leaving Excel and we're jumping into Power BI. And as Marion said, it's a kind of a dip the toe session. So it is kind of designed for people, I guess, who haven't done much with it before and just want to get the lay of the land, maybe how to get up and running with Power BI, or just want to see what the fuss is about, maybe where it differs to Excel, and maybe just identify a niche where you could start to use it. So really just kind of take the mystery out of it. Anyone who did session 1 with me, 3 weeks ago now, if you recall, session 1 was building a dashboard using Excel. And if you recall, let me just go back to it again for a moment. This was the dashboard we ended up with at the end of that session. And we just went through I suppose the breakdown of how we went from our raw data to our completed dashboard, and essentially it was through pivot tables and pivot charts and so on that we accomplished it. So building visuals out of data can be done in Excel, and I'm not saying that we need to sort of ignore that and move to Power BI for all of those types of requirements. But Power BI is a feature or a solution which, if you have quite intense reporting requirements and you have a lot of data, Power BI essentially specializes in capturing complex data sets and then allowing you to create visuals out of them. So I suppose it's kind of on the same theme as our first session, but it's essentially learning how do we do these types of dashboards and reporting using Power BI. And I guess today it's just trying to flesh out, why would I use Power BI instead of Excel? Or, am I dumping Excel? We're not going to be dumping Excel, though, by the way. Excel's going to be with us. But just in terms of reporting, though, Power BI might be a better place to go if you have heavy wants or needs in relation to these types of dashboard reports. So it's just kind of unveiling how that works in this new Power BI system. Power BI has been around a good few years. I suppose there's maybe the guts of 10 years in existence, but obviously in maybe the last few years it's really grown legs, and Microsoft are heavily investing in it, so they're releasing new versions of it all the time. Whereas Excel's been around for a lot longer than that, probably about more like 40 years. But and as I say, it's not going anywhere. But the reason they've introduced Power BI is because our I suppose everyone has so much data, and our reporting requirements, I suppose, are growing, and we want more sophisticated reports, and we also have a lot of data. And Excel, again, maybe one weak point Excel has in comparison to Power BI is I suppose Power BI can handle millions and millions of rows of data with ease, whereas Excel can sometimes struggle with that amount of data. So that could be another reason to maybe dip into the world of Power BI. But anyway, let's hopefully by the end you'll get a good idea of what the differences are, and maybe how that's the other side of it as well, is obviously we want to learn about the kind of theory behind it and why we might use one over the other. But I also want to show you how to create a report in Power BI. So it's not just going to be me talking about it. Once we've kind of gone through a few bits of the theory, we're going to get in and show you how to create a report. And we're actually going to show you how to create the report we did in our dashboard session on session 1 of the Lunch and Learns. So it'll be nice to kind of contrast how we did it in Excel, and you'll see the exact same report created in Power BI. So it's a nice one if you want to be able to sort of see the differences and how you go about creating them in one versus the other. So yeah, a little bit of, I say, not really theory, but just kind of things we need to know, I suppose, before we get into Power BI. So yeah, first of all, just what is it? So Power BI is a data visualization and reporting platform. The BI stands for business intelligence. So I suppose it's giving the tools for us to build our own reporting and answer questions that our business has about certain areas, and our data is going to lend itself to answering those questions, and Power BI is hopefully going to get you to get the best out of your data. While the platform is commonly used by specialized business analysts, it is also designed to be easily accessible for those without any specialized data knowledge. So yeah, you don't have to be a data analyst or an expert in data to be able to use Power BI. And that's the nice thing about it. Anybody can kind of dip their toe in and see if I suppose if it's going to benefit you to use it. So yeah, and again, I just want to explain a few things before I get actually into creating a report. And the first thing I want to explain to you is that there's 2 platforms, if I can call them that we can use Power BI through. The main one, and the main one we focus on in this session, is called Power BI Desktop. This is a free download, so anybody can go in and download this from Microsoft's site. I've got the link in this PowerPoint presentation, which I will send on to you. So if you haven't downloaded this previously, as I say, anybody can go in and download this for themselves, be it a business user, a personal user, a student, anybody can go in and download that. And this is where the Power BI Desktop side of things is where we build the reports. So it's where we import the data that we want to create the report from, where we fashion the data and maybe transform it if it's not great data, and then we can build the visuals and reports out of it. So that's all done through Power BI Desktop. Now, there is another part of Power BI, which is called Power BI Service, or powerbi.com, sometimes it's referred to. This is essentially if your intention is to share your reports with other people. This is typically for people maybe working in larger organizations who are in a team or who want to share their reports with senior leadership. Power BI Service would be the place that the report you've designed using the desktop program, you publish it to the service, which is the kind of online area, if you like, and everybody who uses Power BI can set up a Power BI Service account, and your reports can be then published to your account. If you're part of an organization, you can then share those reports with other people. So that's kind of where the service comes into play. You may be wondering where they make their money. If I'm telling you anybody can download this and use this for free, yeah, it's free up to a point, as in you can go in, you can build reports to your heart's content. You can build the most complex report ever. But it's when you want to share it, that's when a license has to be purchased for you to be able to do that. So essentially, it's like I say, you can build away in Power BI Desktop, create reports, do whatever you want. When they're then, you can actually publish them as well. In terms of the free side of things, you can still publish them. But if I want to share the report, I need a license to do that. And the person with who I'm sharing also needs a license. So that's where they make their cash on Power BI. So if you're now, if you're a person who doesn't, if you're a lone wolf and you don't work with anybody else and you're self-employed or whatever, you can still use Power BI to create reports for your own kind of data analysis. But if you're in a small business, you might have to buy, there's kind of a per user license, which is about $10 a month, I think. Or if you're in a large organization, there's more enterprise solutions available for that kind of situation. But yeah, so the service is where they make their money, where people want to share their lovely reports that they've created. But so that's just giving you, I suppose, an overall view of the landscape of what Power BI involves. Like I said, for today's session, I want you to learn how to get started creating the reports, and then you can figure out, okay, well, it's going to benefit me or it's not. And then if I'm in a situation where I want to share them, that may be then where you might go down the road of looking at licensing. But it's just laying all that out for you at this point. There's a slide there just listing the strengths of Power BI. I'm not going to kind of read through that. You can read through that in your own time. And yeah, Power BI Desktop. So as I said, a freely downloadable application. So essentially, when you've downloaded and installed it, it'll be sitting in there on your programs list in your computer, like Excel does or like Word does. You'll just open it up when you want to use it. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to show you Power BI Desktop. I'm just going to show you what the interface looks like. Just poke around a little bit, and then we're going to just build that training report that I spoke about. So when you have downloaded it, you might have a shortcut to it on your desktop. You might also see a little, shortcut down on your taskbar. I hope everybody can see my screen there. Just let me know if you can't. Maybe Arlene, you might let me know, just to be sure. Just usually there's a little banner around the edge where I see that you can see it. I'll keep going.
Desktop,
say again, Arlene.
Within your desktop.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. As long as you can see it, that's perfect. Yeah, so I'm now going to open up Power BI Desktop. So as I say, the program, once you've installed it, will be there. You might have a shortcut on the desktop. You will see it within your programs list on your computer, and you'll probably have a shortcut on your taskbar as well. Perfect. So here we are. I just opened up Power BI Desktop. So like I said, this is the program you'll have installed. It would be, as a free to install. And when you open it, this is what it looks like. Generally, a little splash screen comes up here as well, which just has happened. So this is Power BI Desktop. So on the left-hand side, on the splash screen that appears, are recent files that I would have worked on. In the center, you get some video, training videos essentially. And then on the right-hand side, what's new? So that means essentially every month they actually update and release a new version of Power BI Desktop, and it's usually automatically updated. And essentially what they're doing is they're enhancing it. They're adding new features into it every month. So they are, I suppose, growing its capabilities all the time. So I say heavily investing in it. Microsoft are plowing money into it. This screen here, I'm just going to close it off. That's just, as I say, kind of an intro screen. And then this itself here is the Power BI Desktop window. There's quite a lot going on in it, I guess. And I suppose when you're new to Power BI, just to kind of lay it out there, when I started using it first, the biggest struggle I had was just getting around and just there's a lot of layers to it, I guess. But like anything, over time, continued use of it, things become robotic after a while, and you just remember where everything is. But yeah, that's probably something you might find a little bit frustrating at the start, is knowing where to be and knowing where to go. But like I say, just practice on that and you'll get there. So the screen itself, there's kind of 3 zones in Power BI Desktop. There's 3 buttons you'll see on the side here. So you've got a report view, which is the view I'm in at the moment. This is where we would essentially build our visuals. On the left-hand side, again, if I go back here, we've got also a table view. Now, remember, this is a completely blank report. There's nothing in it yet. So obviously all these views are going to be empty. But table view would be where if I had data in the report, I could go just look at the data that I've loaded through, that I'm building my visuals from. And then the third view you have is model view. Model view is not something I'll be getting into much detail on today, but essentially Power BI reports can be built on multiple tables of data. So with model view gives you that sort of overall perspective of all the tables that are in your report and how they connect to each other. Again, don't worry about that for the moment. You won't be getting into the nitty-gritty on that for a little while. But back to report view, like I said, that's where the reports themselves are built. and just to give you a little tour of the screen before we actually start to build one. The top section there has a ribbon, kind of like you'd have in Excel, and you've got some tabs then at the top. So home, insert, modeling, and so on. And again, buttons that do various things. Center part of the page and the main part of the report view is where you build your report. So this is like the report canvas, essentially. And then you've got 3 panels over on the right-hand side. Again, you'll see as I start to build a report in a couple of minutes what these are for. But yeah, as you can imagine, the visualizations panel is what we use to actually build the different visuals that we would like to use. So you'll see things in there like charts, you'll see a little map, you'll see little tables, slicers, all that kind of stuff. So that's your toolkit essentially for building your report visuals. The data area is when we have loaded data into the report, that's where we'll find it and be able to. So for example, when we go to create a chart, we'll add a chart in, and then from our data, we will tell Power BI what we would like that chart to display, maybe sales by location, whatever it might be. We'll pick that from our data. And then the filters panel, again, at a basic level, or when you're starting out, you don't tend to use it very much, but that filters panel, you can just hide it until such time as you get to that point of your learning where you're ready for it. But for when you're starting out, don't worry about the filters panel at this stage. Really, it's just those 2, visualizations and data, that you'll be getting familiar with. So that's kind of, yeah, just to give you the lay of the land, really, I suppose. Now, I'm actually going to show you a finished report, just so you can, again, see what the end product would look like. So this is the report here so this is in Power BI. And this is actually, it's the same report we built in our first session that we did, which was the Excel dashboard session. And as I said, I'm trying to keep it the same so that you can kind of see how we did it in Excel versus then how today we're going to do it in Power BI. So again, just to remind you, if I go back to Excel, this was the dashboard we built in Excel, which was comprised of our raw data, which we organized into pivot tables, and then we built our visuals and slicers and so on from that. So there's quite a bit of effort and work involved in this. We got there though, and as you saw, it's quite doable. Power BI though, I suppose, it's more attuned to, once you get the data into the report, you can just start building your visuals directly from your data. So, you don't have to worry about creating, there's no pivot table work required in Power BI. Everything is sort of at your fingertips in terms of once you get the data in, you can just directly then start to build your visuals. And the visuals on my screen here, you can see I've got some slicers along the top, similar to what we had in the Excel report. So these will allow me to filter the data by any of these options. You'll see then we have a few visuals like we did in the Excel report showing kind of overall totals. So these are called cards in Power BI. So each of these would be a card visual displaying, in this case, the number of courses, our total revenue and our costs. And then we have some charts. We've got a column chart showing our number of courses by location, our revenue by quarter, and our certified, uncertified courses, and our top 5 customers by revenues, just like we had in our Excel dashboard. One thing I want to point out to you that's very different to Excel reports or Excel dashboards is Power BI has a native ability for its visuals to filter each other. So this is a built-in capability that Power BI has. What I mean by it is, when I'm looking, so I obviously have some slicers up here that I can slice the data by and get into certain aspects of it. But the charts themselves and the visuals themselves can also be used to filter. So what I mean by that is, if I'm looking at this 25 courses here for Sligo, if I click on that bar in my report, do you notice how the other visuals on the page automatically filter for that bar? So this is a really nice ability that just comes built into Power BI. It's able to do this automatically. If I click again on the same bar, all the data returns. But it's a really lovely feature to be able to just kind of interrogate your data almost through the existing visuals and in addition through the slicers if needs be. So again, if I wanted to look at my revenue by quarter, for example, here, if I click on the October 2018 quarter, again, you'll see all the visuals on the page now filter for that month or that quarter, sorry. So yeah, just an interesting little thing to point out. So again, if you were trying to build functionality like that into an Excel report, it would require an awful lot of macro work and sophisticated VBA, whereas in Power BI, it just automatically does that for you. Just before I leave this report, so as I say, this is a finished, I've built it all and I've formatted it all and I've got all the different colors and so on built into it. But so that's my report view in a finished report. That's what it looks like. The table view, again, just to point out these three kind of areas of Power BI. The table view looks like this. So this would be the raw data that those visuals are built upon. And again, I'll show you in a moment how we get that raw data into our Power BI report. And then our model view, as I say, that third button there. Really at this point, and when you're working with a very simple report like this, the model view doesn't have much relevance. It's just showing me there's my table of data that I'm creating my visuals from. Model view is more for when we have more complex reports where we've got maybe multiple tables of data. Again, not for today's session, but it's just, I suppose, showing you those, again, those three zones, if you like. So report view, table view, model view. So let's have a look at how this would have been built. So I am going to just push that down out of the way, and I'm going to go into Power BI Desktop and just start from a blank report. And we're going to use, if I just show you, while that's opening up there in the background, we're going to build our report using the same data that we used in our first Lunch and Learn, where we built the Excel dashboard. So this is the data that we're going to use. And I'll just show you the data just to remind you of it before we pull it into Power BI. So when we create Power BI reports, we can use lots of different types of sources, Excel obviously being one. So when we build our report in a moment, this is the data that we're going to pull into our Power BI report. So this is an Excel based file on a sheet called course data, and I think it's in a table called training data. So when I go to build my report, I'll be able to pull from either the sheet or the actual table structure can be referenced either. But yeah, it's the same data we used on our first session. So it's training information. So it's got the date that different courses happened, who is the tutor, what fee we brought in, what was our costs, all that kind of data. And each row represents a course that we ran. So that's the data. How do we get that into Power BI? So I'm back in Power BI here. I'm just going to close this front screen here. And now I have a fresh blank report that I can work on. Now, the good news is anyone who did session 2 with me last week, you have a bit of a head start because the engine that's used to get the data into Power BI is Power Query. So the Power Query feature we looked at last week is also in Power BI. So it's actually in Excel and it's in Power BI. And it works exactly the same way in Power BI. So basically it's the grabber of the data. That's what your Power Query is going to do for you in Power BI. It's going to grab the data that you want to base your report on, pull it into the Power BI report. And as we saw last week, if your data is not in great shape, it has so many capabilities for getting your data in better shape. So you can do things like we saw last week. We can combine multiple files together. We can clean the data. If there's unwanted data in there, we can filter it out. All those options I showed you last week can be used in Power BI. But how do we get there? So if you look at our, so I'm in report view. This tends to be the view I'd be in most of the time in Power BI. So in my report view, there is my data area. And as you'll see, there's a few different buttons. There's the first button's called Get Data. And if you remember in Power Query in Excel, that's what our button was called in Excel. It was called the Get Data button. So if you want to explore all the possible sources that you can pull from for Power BI, you can hit that button and you can go down to the More option at the bottom. And that will give you a list of, so these are essentially all the sources that you can pull data from into Power BI. Chief option it gives you is Excel workbook. So many of us use Excel as our source data. But as you can see, other things there like text or CSV files, folders like I showed you last week, PDF files even, you can scrape data from those and pull them into Power BI. And then there's a huge range of online and other sources that you can pull data from. Now I'm going to cancel out of this because you'll see we do have a handy button, which is if we want to use an Excel workbook as our source, we can just go straight for this button here. So there's no need to really go into this fella here if you're just pulling from Excel. You can just go straight for your Excel workbook. So I'm going to click on that button. And again, you actually have the data for this from your session 1, but this is the file here that we're going to pull from. It's the Excel file I showed you a moment ago. And what we will see is the first thing, just like when we were doing Power Query last week, the first thing it'll ask me is, where do you want me to pull the data from? So I've told it it's that file, but now it's asking, do I want to pull from the table or the sheet name? So I'm going to go for the table, and I'll just see a little preview of the data that we saw a moment ago is now appearing here. And again, just like last week, when we're doing a Power Query, I would always advise that we go for the transform data button. And that would give us the opportunity to check that our data is okay. And if there's any little transformations that we would like to apply to it, we can do them here. So hopefully anyone who was on last week's session, this screen looks a bit familiar to you. This is Power Query. It's exactly the same as what we learned last week. So if you recall, we had our applied steps panel on the right. We have loads of options then for if we need to transforming that data. This particular data set is fine. I know it's all good data, so I don't really need to do anything much with it. But remember, I showed you last week, we can remove unwanted rows, we can transform in terms of splitting columns, we can trim them, all that type of stuff, remember, you can do through your Power Query. This query that I'm creating is called training data, and you'll see the name on the query is on the right hand side here. So if you want to change the name of the query, you can just change it there. I'm quite happy with it, but the name can be changed if you want to make it more meaningful. And again, I'm not really going to do anything with this particular data because it's good data. Everything's come in fine. You can see the data types. We talked about these last week. It has set a data type on all the columns. So, you know, we've got number columns, we've got start date has been assigned the date type, text obviously has been assigned to a lot of them as like the course names, the levels and so on. The duration has got a decimal type, I think, by the looks of it. So again, you do that. Before you load the data through, you just check over it, make sure you're happy. Also a good thing to do, what I find is, if you want to check a column for its data quality, if you hit the arrow on the filter there, you know, you'll see exactly what's in that column. So for example, and I think I might have mentioned this to you last week, if something was spelled differently, but it's the same thing. So if access is spelled with 3 S's in one instance, it will appear as another item in the drop down. So this is a good way to check your data quality. And then you make the decision, okay, do I need to go back to the source data and fix that up? Or will I add a step into the query here that will fix it? They're kind of your 2 options. So yeah, this is good. This is good to know that the Power Query engine is the first step when you're creating a report in Power BI. So to remind you, what we did was we just simply went to the Excel workbook option. We then were asked to browse to the file. Then we were asked to tell it what sheet or table we want to pull from. And then when we hit the transform data button, we're getting into Power Query. Like I say, I'm not going to go into the whole realm of Power Query again because we did that in the last session. So I'm happy with my data. I'm not going to do any much in terms of transformation. So then what do I do to get it into the report? I click close and apply. And if we just give it a moment, Power BI it's not instant. It does take a moment sometimes to do things. So as you can see, it's doing a load there of the data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep an eye on the data panel on the right-hand side here. And once it has finished loading the data through, I will see my query that I've created. If you recall, we called it training data, has been created. And if I hit the little arrow beside it, these are all of the columns that are in that data set. So that's how we get the data through. And that's always going to be your starting point, getting that raw data and loading it into your Power BI report. And if it's an Excel-based file, we can just use the Excel workbook option. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, guys. So if you have questions, I can have a look at those as we go through. Yeah, just nothing in there yet. So that's perfect. So now that we have a bit of data, if I just show you on the left-hand side, we talked about the different views. So in report view, there is the data. I know I have data now to work with. Also, if you want to actually just get a look at the data as well, you can go to your table view. So that's just giving you a look at the data that you have pulled through. Now, you cannot change the data here. You cannot go in here and start typing and modifying the data. If any mods need to be done, you'll need to do that back in the source Excel file. Do you know what I mean? So if a number is incorrect or you spot something wrong, that should be really fixed in the source data. back to report view again. So like I say, yeah, if you're just wanting to get a look at the data, table view is there. And obviously you can go back into the original source file at any time as well if you want to just look at the data there. But they give you a nice view of the data in your table view of your report. Now, at this point, I haven't yet saved this report, so you'll see it's still called untitled. So I'm just going to save that. And it's the usual rules when it comes to saving. You can save it wherever you like. I'm just going to put it out onto my desktop here. And I'll just call it first PBI report. So I'll save this, I'll call it first Power BI report, and I'll just save it out onto my desktop. So just to kind of give you some clarity on where that file actually is, if I just minimize this for the minute, the report that I've just created is, sorry, it's just over on my other screen, pull it across. My other screen is very messy though, so I'm trying to find it here and I can't see it. Let me see first, Power BI. Oh yeah, there we go. So that's what it looks like. So once you've created your Power BI report, it's just like any other file you create, like an Excel file or a Word document. It's saved somewhere. And then if you close that Power BI report and you want to go back in and do something more with it at a later point, that's the file that I'll be looking for. Okay, so that's what your Power BI report actually ends up as, just a regular file. Next thing we're going to look at now is how, if we wanted to start to build some visuals out of that data, so we have our data now loaded in, how do we start to build those visuals? So again, if I just show you the finished one for a moment, you know, so these are the kinds of visuals we can start to build, like we'll start off maybe with these little cards to show the total number of courses and the total revenue and so on. So if you recall, when we were doing this in Excel, we had to go off and think about it and create our pivot tables first and do all of that. Power BI more straightforward though. It's designed to do this type of work. So we don't need to start creating intermediary pivot tables or anything of the sort. We can simply go straight to the visualizations. And the card is the one I'm talking about that we can use for those kind of high level totals that we would like to show in our report. And again, there's different ways you can do this, but my tendency will be to click on the visual I want to use. So in this case, it's the card. And a card then will just drop into the report canvas. And again, at this point, you can resize it and you can drop it roughly where you want it. And as you can see, there's nothing in it yet. So what I'll do is I'll come over to my data and I'll say, well, what do I want to show in that card? So let's say we want to show a count of the number of courses. So for that one, I could use like the ID field. And if I tick it, so again, while that visual is selected, I tick the ID field. You can see it has done an automatic count of that column. Now, again, if I just remind you what it's done. So this is my ID field here. I chose that as the field to add into my card. And you can see it has automatically counted it. And just to show you again where that ends up in the kind of panels over here. So when I click away from that card, you'll see the panels slightly change. When I click back onto it, I see a little bit now about the card itself. So I can see the field that I've included. You see how it's automatically done the count for you. And you'll see there's a drop down there. So if you wanted to do a different type of calculation, that can be set. Like if you wanted to do a sum of something or an average, you can do that through that little drop down. I'm just going to hide that filters panel because I don't really need it. But yeah, so that's a very simple visual. It's the simplest type of visual that you can create in Power BI. It's the card. And like I say, great for showing a high level total. And then we can just do the same thing then for the, say, I think we had a total revenue card. So again, I'll just drop that card in. And I will say, right, I'll come over to my data. And I think that would be a sum of the course fees. So I'll tick that. And you can see it's automatically done a sum of that column. Now, as you're dragging this stuff around, the nice thing about Power BI, again, it's going to try and help you line things up. So do you see, as I start to resize, when I hit the bottom edge of the visual that's next to me, or next to it, the little red dash line appears. So this is great because it just helps you really precisely line up the visuals on the page. That's something in Excel that can be quite annoying. Power BI makes that a lot easier. And I'll just add the third card. So again, it's just hit the visual. I tend to just drag it roughly where I want it and then tell it what I want to show. So I'm thinking this one, we're going to show our total costs. So remember, it's able to do that because do you notice how it's got the little sigma signs on these columns? That's because if you remember back in Power Query, they would have been defined as number columns. So that's where your data types will be very important, that your columns are set correctly. And again, you can see it's done a nice sum of my costs. So that's those first three visuals. Now, obviously, there's a lot of formatting options and you can change the colors and you can do all that kind of stuff. But what I would tend to do first is I'll get all the visuals in place, then afterwards do all your cosmetic kind of formatting. So that's those three done. So if we go back to our completed report, the next visual I'm going to create is this one down here, the number of courses by location. So this is just a column chart, and I obviously need to incorporate the location column and the number, the ID column probably, so it'll do a count of them. So let's try that one out. So before I go to add my next visual, make sure that none of the existing visuals are highlighted. And then this one here, the fourth one in on the top, that's your trusty basic column chart. And again, when you start with Power BI, just keep it simple. Just use simple visuals so that you're getting an understanding of how it all works. Don't go jumping straight into these more complex ones. So cluster column, I'm going to drop that in. And again, I'll just give it a rough size of where I would like to place it. Again, you can rejig this all later on. Then I'll come in again over to my data. What do I want to show? So I want to show location. And I want to show the count of the courses. So I'm just going to pull the ID in again. And look what that's given me. So that's given me, and again, it's automatic. Power BI is smart enough to know, you'll see that for this visual, it obviously has an X and a Y axis. And it's smart enough to know based on the data types and just, it's smart, it's got built into it. It's smart enough to know where these things should go. So it's automatically generating my nice chart there showing my count of courses by location. The next one I might try is just the visual where we had our revenue by quarter. That one would be our line chart. So that's the first one on the second row of visuals. So I'll drop that one in. Now, again, one thing I'll say to you is, and I used to always make this mistake, if you have a visual selected and then you click on another visual, like if I click on the line chart, it changes the current visual. So just be careful. If it's a new visual altogether that you want to create, just make sure nothing existing is highlighted. And then you can go for your next visual. So I'll go for my line chart. Again, we'll drag it in roughly, put it in where we want it. And for this one, it's I suppose it's revenue over time. So again, it'll be the total course fee, I guess, is my revenue. So I'll take that one. And then in terms of my dates, and again, this is just something that Power BI does automatically. I have one date field in my table of data, which is the start date. And as you'll see, date fields get treated a little different to numbers or text. It gives me a little what's called date hierarchy. So I'll see year, quarter, month, and day. So if I want to pull the year and quarter into the mix, I can tick the two of those. I had already ticked the course fee. And as you can see, it's just built the visual based on my selections. So again, very easy. You know, I suppose if we think back to Excel, we had a lot of work to do, I suppose, to get these types of visuals created. But this is what Power BI is for. Its ability to create visuals. That's where it, I suppose, really comes into its own. We'll go back to our report again here. So certified versus uncertified, percentage on that. So again, I'll come into my visuals. That's the little donut chart I would have used. And again, we'll just roughly get it into position. And this one, so certified, I need that field. And again, I could bring my ID, course ID in, and it'll just give me automatically a percentage of those. So again, very, very simple to do. I'll just drag these around a little bit. And then the final chart I think I have was the top 5 customers by revenue, if I recall. I'll just jump back here and show you that one. So here, top 5 customers by revenue. So we want to see customer and their revenue, but it's the top 5 we're interested in. So again, that is a bar chart this time. So bar chart, the clustered bar is the third one in from the left on the top row of visuals. And we'll just drag that into position. So for this one, I would want to see the customer name. And I guess, again, the course fee is my revenue. So that one is the one I will go for. Now, this actually is one thing I'm going to show you what we can do, what we can use the filters panel for, just to give you an example, because this at the moment is showing me all my revenue or all my customers, not just the top 5. So a really nice little thing I can do in my filters panel is for this visual, I can go into that customer name. I can change the basic filtering to top N filter, and I can tell it I want to see the top 5 by what value, by course fee. So actually drag that field into this value area and watch the visual here. If I hit apply filter, I'm now seeing my top 5 by revenue, or course fee, as a course fee and revenue are the same for us here. So that's just a little insight into what that filters panel is capable of. Slicers then at the top. So if you recall back in our finished report, we can slice by level, name, by date, venue, and tutor. So to add any of those, I would use this fella. So this is the slicer visual here. So again, I make sure I don't have anything selected. I add in my slicer, and then you just simply tell it, okay, what do you want this slicer to filter by? So for example, if we go course level, you'll see it adds a slicer in. So if I now click on advanced or intermediate or introduction, it's automatically slicing and filtering all the data below. There's a little eraser on it so that you can clear your selections. And one thing I'll point out to you, if you are going to play around with the slicers, will probably form important parts of your reports. So with your slicers, I'm just going to show you the formatting panel. So this is our first look at this panel. So when we have a visual in place and we want to tweak it, or we want to just change the settings on it, that is what this little button here does. This gives you access to your formatting panel. So any visual you click on, be it a card, be it a chart, whatever it is, or a slicer, will have its own set of properties. And as in that button there is where we go to get at those properties. So for a slicer, it's just an important one to show you. In the slicer settings here, you can choose what style of slicer. So as you can see, it's gone for this vertical list option, but we can also go for tile. Tile is if you have more like of a button style interface that you'd like to create for your slicer, or you also get drop down. Drop down is good if you want a number of slicers and maybe they all contain quite a lot of options, because it doesn't take up a whole lot of room. So that's how your drop down slicer behaves. That's what I would have used actually out on the finished report. Each of these ones we can see is set to the drop down style. So again, this is something you can play about with and experiment with and see what works best. And again, every report's different. So it's just kind of showing you where the options are. The date slicer, we noticed, if we go back again to the finished report, the date slicer looked like this. So this looks really nice. So it gives you the capability to kind of slide this along if you want to see certain date ranges, or you can also just click on the dates here if you want to pick dates from the date pickers. So for that type of slicer, again, in Power BI, it's very simple to do. We would just go for the regular slicer button that we've just seen, and we would add the start date into it. That's obviously the date in question we can slice on. And essentially, it just gives it to you automatically in that format. I just need to widen it a little bit. But that is my slicer now for my date element of my visuals. So again, we can use the slider bar, or we can hit the little calendars here to adjust the date ranges. So as you'll see, and hopefully as you're kind of recognizing, it's just very easy, I suppose, to build these visuals. And like I say, I'm not saying you have to use Power BI for this type of thing, but it's trying to just, I suppose, explain how we would have done it in Excel, how we do it in Power BI. And I guess it's up to you then to figure out, is it worth your while using Power BI for these types of reporting? I guess I would say if you have some regular type reports that are, that don't change very much and that are maybe shared out on a weekly or monthly basis, Power BI is ideal for that type of situation. Excel, you'll still use that for all like ad hoc stuff, but for core reports that are always there and are always sort of need to be accessed, that's where Power BI, I suppose, would be preferable if you can over Excel. But again, all comes down to your requirements and also your business structure. If you're in a large organization, Power BI can be really helpful in that regard, because you can share the reports with other people and everybody's just looking at that one version of the truth. But again, I know it just depends on your setup and your where you're coming from. Just to kind of tidy it up a little bit, so you can add in terms of if I go back again and show you our example report, you can see how we've kind of got a little banner at the top of it there, where we've got the kind of title on the report. Again, you can do something like that by going to the Insert tab in Power BI and then going to Shapes. And then, for example, if I use this, it's called a rounded kind of tab rectangle. I can just draw that in. So I'd often use this technique just to kind of give my report a kind of a heading area. And then in that, you can draw a text box where you'll put the report heading. So just to kind of give you an idea of how those things are done, because again, you want your report to look well. So these little techniques can just help it get there. So this is just a text box. So that's from the Insert tab. I've added a text box. I put my text in. I've changed the font on it. And then if I drag that up to that kind of banner at the top, and I'll just turn off the background on it so that it is transparent. And maybe I'll make the font color white. So, these are just the kinds of things you'll be doing. It just gives, as I say, gives that report more of a structure. And in fact, I'd nearly maybe do that first. I'd maybe lay out the report with that kind of bookend. You can put something at the top like I've done there. And I'd often put in a little shape maybe at the bottom as well. Again, just to kind of give it a bit of structure. So I'd maybe put a little banner like that at the bottom, a little skinny shape drawn at the bottom, just so you get that kind of more structured look to it. And then you also have if you want to kind of build sections or parts in the report, you also have an option to draw lines on it. So this is the line shape. So you see how you can kind of create lines in it that you can kind of close off certain parts of the report and just kind of design it out a little bit in terms of pockets and different parts to the page. Again, quite manual, but again, can all be done through the Shapes option from the Insert tab. So that's essentially just the kind of cosmetic stuff. Yeah, just the question has just come in. If you build this report based on data for January, how do you apply to February when received and save the two sets of visuals, i.e. one for January, one for February? Or conversely, how do you combine January and February data to give year to date? Yeah, I guess, so I suppose this data that it's pulling from, if you recall, would have been this Excel file that we saw there a moment ago. So I guess, yeah, if you're getting multiple months of data and you want to combine them, that would be, we did a folder type query last week in session 2, where we could have our Power Query pull from a folder, and then we can just drop all the monthly files into that. And then in Power BI desktop, you've got your refresh button there. So you can just hit refresh if the source information changes. So that would be my advice. If it's multiple months that you want to combine and they come in piecemeal to you, I would do a folder type query. So when we go in to get our data, do a folder query that pulls from the folder, and then I'd say your monthly data will just be dropped in there on an ongoing basis, and the Power BI will just pull the months together for you. And maybe just to clarify that a little bit more, if I go back to the raw data here for a minute. So remember, this is the file here that I have pulled the data from. It's just opening up here now. So I'm just going to show you, so we have the 111 courses at the minute, which obviously correspond to what's in this file here. So if I add in another course, I'll just copy paste this data here, and I'm going to actually, the data at the moment goes up to as far as I think end of 2019. So let's go into 2020 maybe with this new course, just kind of so how you see the data comes through to the Power BI report. So this is a new course, we're adding it in for 2020, and I'm going to maybe up the fee, the income maybe to say 10,000 or something, just again so you'll see how that impacts in our visuals and so on. So if I go, so we're basically updating the raw data that's feeding the Power BI report. So in Power BI, to get these visuals to update with that new data, there's your refresh button. And as I do that, you'll notice the graph here should change, and we go up with our income for January 2020. We've gone 112 courses now. So the data is going to feed through from your Power Query. Again, remember your first step when you built your report was you got your data, you pointed it to that file. So if that file changes, your Power BI report will change as well. But yeah, the refresh option is what kind of forces that to happen. Just to go back to something I mentioned earlier, so if you're liking the look of this and you're thinking, yeah, you know, this could be useful for some of our reporting requirements. The other side of this is once this report is built, you do then, as I was saying, so you have the option to publish it. So if I just go back to that slide again for a moment. So we said to you, there's two platforms. The desktop is what I've just been in there. That's the program we use to build our reports. We do our Power Query, we get the data in, build the visuals, build a report. Then, if you want to go to that next step of publishing it, that's where you can then share it. So I suppose just for anyone who's maybe thinking ahead and wondering where do you go from here? Publishing it means, let me just actually show you it. I'm going to hit the publish button here. Now, in order to do this, you have to have a Power BI account, but that can be set up for free from powerbi.com. So I'm going to publish my report. I'm not going to get into what workspaces are, but you have a workspace, a private workspace called My Workspace that you can publish reports to. So I'm going to just select that option. And you will see it start to publish it now to Power BI. So I just want to show you this element of it, just so you know you've got the full story. So it's just told me there that it has published it, it has successfully published it, and it's given me a little option here to open it in Power BI. So if I do that, it brings me to my browser. I'm already logged into my Power BI account, and my report, I will now see in a moment, is published. And when it's published, you know, you can't move anything around on it. It's locked in place. So I suppose the desktop one, you know, as you hover over items on the page here, you know, you're in a design mode essentially. But once it's published though, it's kind of bedded in, it's kind of completed, and it behaves as a finished report. But what I'm getting at then is once it's published, that's when we get the option to then share it. And this is what I'm saying to you is what maybe could be very interesting if you have a required, let's say you report out to a leadership team on a monthly basis or a weekly basis, you can send them the link to your Power BI report, and then they can go into that link and look at this report in real time anytime they want. The report can have also a scheduled refresh set up on it. So this report can be told to pull from the raw data on a daily basis, or even a few times a day if you want the data to be live and up to date in as much as possible. So again, I'm just trying to show you the full landscape of what's possible here. So we can build the reports, and then if we want to publish them and share them, that's maybe another side of things that might entice you to Power BI. But remember, as I said, the sharing aspect of it is where the licensing comes in. And again, depending on what your setup is, if you're a small business, the outlay for that would be something in around $10 a month per user. And also to remember that if you share or want to just look at a shared report, you have to have a license in both of those situations. But I'm just trying to give you the whole story today, and then, like I say, you can go and have a little play with it. But as I said to you, there's nothing to stop you doing all of what I've just done there on a free basis. You can download Power BI Desktop, play around, build reports, publish them. It's just the sharing. That's when the licensing will be applicable. So just to finish out, I suppose, so just to remind you, we built a report. We started the process through getting the data in, and that was where we essentially used Power Query. So that's a really good thing to know. If you did last week's session, you're on a head start. You've seen how Power Query works already. Once we've done the Power Query, the data is loaded through to our report. It appears over here on our data panel, and we can then start to build our visuals. Publishing it then is optional. We don't have to publish it. But if you wish to do so, you're just going to get, as I say, those are kind of additional sharing options. Is there anything else I wanted to mention? There's obviously a lot in this, and there is a huge amount more. I mean, I'm obviously just scratching the surface today, but I think it's nice to kind of relate it back to our first session in terms of how we built it in Excel. Here's how we've done it in Power BI. And just incidentally, Georgina, how to nicely format. Yeah, like the other one. Absolutely, yeah. So obviously I've spent a bit of time over on this one here. applying various formatting settings. So maybe maybe to finish out, I'll just show you a few of where those settings live. So for example, if I take the column chart as our focus, so if I had to add maybe the data labels into it and change the colors and so on. So we'll just maybe it'll probably be the only time I'll have to go through this one, but you'll get a taste, I suppose, of how to do it, Georgina, once you see how this one's done. So to get this chart to look like the other one I've just showed you, first of all, it's this properties area I've mentioned. This is where you're going to get all of the settings for each visual. So for example, I would have turned on my data labels. So that gets the number coming in on the columns. And I always tend to then turn off the y-axis labels because they're kind of unnecessary. So again, if I go over to my formatting area, go to y-axis and just turn off the title and the values, just so you get a nice clean graph. So you don't need those, so I would turn them off. Paul, I see your question. I'll come to you in 1 minute. Just a couple of other things in terms of getting a right title on your visuals. So I really want to maybe say here, courses by location. Again, in my properties, if I go to the general tab, and if I go into the title area, I can put in my title there. So I can say number of courses by location. So that is me just typing the name into the title, which is in the general area of the properties for that visual. And then if you want to adjust things like, say, the color of the data labels or the color of the text at the bottom here, if I go back to where I found my data labels. So again, they cram an awful lot into these little areas here. So this is a bit of a frustration finding what you're looking for. So I think it's in the value there. If I change my color, for example, to orange and bold it, you know, we're getting to the point of what I had in my finished one. But that's it really, Georgina. It's just rooting around those settings and you'll find the little options and so on to make it look different. So you're just rooting around, you'll find colors, you'll find fonts and all of that. If you want the kind of banner, actually, that's one thing I might show you. I had in the other one, it's like a banner like this along the top of color. And I think that looks really well. You can see I've used it consistently through all the visuals. If I go back to the title properties for my column chart here, so again, it's into this button, it'll be under general, and there's my title. Here's where you can set that. So if we go for background color and we go for the blue and maybe set our text color to white and center it, you know, you're getting that kind of look to it. So really it's going to be rooting around these properties here, but each visual has the same kind of properties available. And one little tip I'll give you is if you can get a visual looking how you want it, like I've got my title in place there, you can use the format painter to use the settings of that visual on another one. So you just click on the one which has the formatting you want, hit the painter, and then if I, for example, I'll click on this one here, see how it applies those same settings. So you can do all the work on one of your visuals and then recycle that using the painter on other visuals. And again, just maybe changing the title text there. But anyway, just a little dive into those things. Georgina, I hope that answers that for you. Paul, you had a question. Between Power BI and Excel pivots, I suppose, are the table and slicer options for the visuals identical, or does Power BI allow more sophisticated additional options? Yeah, I guess the slicers, yeah, I suppose the properties area, Paul, I'd encourage you to maybe explore that. But yeah, one property I think I've mentioned is the ability to have a different style of slicer. So we have the drop down, we have the vertical list, which is a more kind of clickable, you know, kind of shows everything in a list. And then you've got a tile option as well, which is more kind of button style interface. So yeah, you will have more options and control on your slicers in Power BI than you do in Excel. You also get things in here like where was I thinking of it? Yeah, sorry, it's under the selection. Do you see there how you can force single select, or you know, single select means you're only going to allow them to pick one option, you know, so you can kind of be a bit limiting over how that slicer behaves. Multi-select with the control key, if you want that ability, that can be switched on, you know. So yeah, so to answer your question, Paul, yes, you get more options with your slicers. And actually they've introduced, I know we've gone a little bit over time, sorry, but I'll just mention one final thing. They've introduced a new slicer button. This is what I'm saying. They're building and they're adding to this all the time. So there's actually a new slicer button. I haven't had a chance to explore it yet, but I think they've got even more features within that one, Paul. So that might be of interest to you. So listen, I'll leave it at that. I know it's a very quick tour, but hopefully it's just given you some insights into how to get up and running. And best of luck with it. I'll hand you back over to Marion now for a wrap up.
Okay, Niamh, again, thank you very, very much for that presentation. A lot in it, and definitely you'd have to go away and just play about with it yourself, just to kind of familiarize yourself and become comfortable with it if you're using it in the work environment. So I hope to all of those who have logged on for today and the previous 2 weeks, I hope it's been worthwhile for you in terms of getting an introductory taster session. For these tools that are available to us. And again, like that, thanks to Niamh, and looking forward to catching up again, Niamh, in terms of your presentations, etc. So thanks everybody, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.